Friday when he unveiled the new anti-terrorism measures. And they want Stephen Harper to apologize. They say he unfairly tainted Canadian mosques by linking them to the promotion of terrorism. Both the National Council of Canadian Muslims and the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association issued a news release today saying they're deeply troubled by the Prime Minister's comments last Friday. Ihsan Gardi is the Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. He is with me now in the studio. Mr. Gardi, good to see you again. Thanks for coming to speak with me. So why are you taking issue with the remarks of the Prime Minister last Friday in Richmond Hill?
Well, the remarks of the Prime Minister were made in a context where this bill was really introduced outside of Parliament. It seems to be really an electioneering type of bill. And the kind of comments that the Prime Minister made, despite assurances that he's made in the past that he's thanked the Muslim community for their support, they also taint the wider and broader community. Our fellow Canadians don't see these qualifications that are sometimes made after the fact, but the fact remains that once those comments are made, the perception remains in the minds of most people that, well, obviously this is somewhere where this is occurring, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, mosques are at the forefront of this fight against radicalization towards extremist violence and have and continue to be working on this issue very, very actively.
Okay, let's remind Canadians of exactly what it is the Prime Minister said. Here's Stephen Harper last Friday in Richmond Hill.
You know, it doesn't matter what the age of a person is, or whether they're in their basement, or whether they're in a mosque or somewhere else. When you are engaged in activities that explicitly promote or advocate terrorism, that is a serious criminal offense, no matter who you are. It will be a serious criminal offense.
Okay, what's the objectionable part of what he said?
Well, I mean, why mention mosques? I mean, he hasn't mentioned any other places, as we discussed earlier, whether it was a synagogue or a church or an Aryan bonfire. And he's making these comments at the introduction of a bill that is purportedly about making Canadians safer, when in fact it creates the perception then that Canadian Muslim communities are not actively working on this front or are equally affected by threats to our national security, which is completely false.
We asked the Prime Minister's office for a response today. Here's the response we received from the Prime Minister's press secretary, Carl Valle. The Prime Minister did not say that all radicalization occurs in mosques. In fact, he said the opposite. Radicalization towards jihadi terrorism can happen anywhere. Following the attacks last fall, the Prime Minister specifically thanked members of the Muslim community for categorically and unequivocally condemning the attacks and recognized the Muslim community for their efforts in fighting radicalization. That's what his office is saying today.
Well, and I'm grateful that the office is providing that additional amplification of his remarks. But the fact remains that, when it comes to issues like what we've seen, the attacks here that occurred most recently in Ottawa and in Quebec, the Prime Minister has been missing from his interaction with the mainstream Muslim community. After the attacks of 9/11, Jean Chrétien visited the oldest mosque in Canada to reassure the Canadian Muslims that this was not something about marginalizing or attacking them or holding them responsible for the acts of a few individuals. And we haven't seen the same thing from the Prime Minister's office. It's been almost like he's missing in action on these kinds of files.
Okay, so what is the effect of this as far as you're concerned?
Well, it creates a chill effect, and it certainly, what it does is certainly furthers stereotypes about Muslims and Islam, that this somehow is something that people who are in Canada are sort of a fifth column, if you will, who should be subject to a stiffer test of loyalty than their fellow citizens.
Okay. Well, let me take the other side for a second. Stephen Harper, if that's the way you view his comments, certainly would not be the first person in this country to question or even claim that radicalization to violent extremism is taking place in some mosques or in other Muslim institutions in this country. What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then, they should be bringing charges. I mean, this is something that it shouldn't be just accusations that are leveled sort of against a broad community. If they have specific information, then charges should be brought. If not, what they're doing is they're tarnishing the image of these kinds of institutions, as I said, that are actively working on the front lines of these kinds of issues. Our organization produced this report, this guide, United Against Terrorism, which we're sending to mosques across this country, having received numerous requests for it, because they're looking to be actively involved and to say, what more can we do? Because we realize that this is something that affects all of us. It can't be viewed as something that is solely the purview or the problem of the Muslim community. radicalization towards violent extremism affects all of us, so we all need to be a part of the solution. And it shouldn't be about holding certain groups to account and saying that you are, it's all your fault, or you're responsible for this alone. You need to be looking to build bridges so that we can actually effectively come up with strategies that are short, medium, and long term to this phenomenon, which, as we've discussed previously, is something that is a complex phenomenon. It has many facets. We've got issues of mental health services. The two attacks that occurred in Canada, there was indications that there was mental health issues there. They came from one of them came from a broken family, at least. So social services needs to be part of this discussion. And at the same time, we need to look at other factors as well, such as the internet, which is, while it can't be said that it's the sole factor, it certainly plays a facilitating role. How can we better counter the messages of radicalization that are being promoted by these violent extremist groups, so that they're reaching the people that are most affected by this, the most vulnerable.
Then what's your reaction to the actual legislation? This new bill that gives CSIS wider powers. In some ways, some have suggested, if the mosques and the Muslim community aren't doing enough to deal with some of these issues, then the bill will.
Well, I mean, the bill has, there's been a number of organizations, including ours, that have expressed deep concerns around this bill from the perspective of finding the right balance between civil liberties and national security. Now, we can all agree that if somebody is planning to do something bad, we certainly should be doing everything within our power to stop that person. At the same time, we have to balance that with our civil liberties. So there's the effect on, chilling free speech. There's lowering thresholds, legal thresholds. And I think really it's the government's responsibility to demonstrate that the powers that they currently have are insufficient. And they haven't done so. They really haven't made that case. There are existing powers that they have on the books, including peace bonds and other powers that they have that they just haven't used. So we believe it's more of an issue of actually enforcing the powers that we have in place, providing additional resources for our national security agencies and for our oversight bodies, such as the Security Intelligence Review Committee, which reviews the actions of CSIS, so that that right balance is struck, so that we have the oversight in place as well to make sure that errors don't take place. And we've all seen the negative impact, the devastating impact that errors can have on individuals like Maher Arar. We're 10 years now after the Arar inquiry, and the recommendations from Justice O'Connor's report remain unimplemented.
Let's finish on this. The City of Montreal is balking at giving a permit to Imam Hamza Chawi for an Islamic community center in that city because the city officials say he preaches radicalism. There are a lot of government officials in this country who raise questions about what's being taught in some Muslim institutions. What's your reaction to what's taking place in Montreal?
Well, the situation in Montreal, I mean, I think that the City Council has to go through its process of ensuring that, they are doing their due diligence to make sure that, any application goes through the correct process. Now, the individual in question has a right to appeal and to make the application in the first place. But if the authorities have information about an individual who is currently promoting radicalization towards extremist violence, which would already be prosecutable, then they should be acting on that.
Okay. Ihsan Gardi, thanks for coming to speak with me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.